Welcome back, dear listeners, to another powerful episode of AIBiz. I'm your host, Avik, and today we are exploring a topic that touches every leader, entrepreneur, and the visionary. It is the art of leadership mastery and building high performance cultures. So, leadership is no longer about the authority, it's all about the clarity, alignment, creating environments where people thrive. But here's the question comes is how do you actually move from theory to the practice? And how do you transform the values, standards, and accountability into the cultures that drive not only profit but also purpose and human potential? And to answer this, I couldn't think of anyone better than my guest today. Please welcome Patrick Francey. So, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Amazing. And dear listeners, before we delve deep into the discussion today, I'd love to introduce you with Patrick. So Patrick is one of the Canada's most respected voices in real estate investment education and the personal development. So over his 40-year career, he has guided entrepreneurs and investors towards financial freedom, supported more than 43,000 uh, property transactions worth over $5.3 billion, and built the organizations where performance and culture go hand in hand. So, as the CEO of the Real Estate Investment Network, host of the Everyday Millionaire podcast, and the co founder of Mindtree, he has dedicated his life to helping people clear the mental clutter and that keeps them stuck and instead design the businesses and lives grounded in clarity, purpose, and the performance. So, dear listeners, I'll not take much of a time. Let's get started. Welcome to the show again, Patrick.
Thank you.
Amazing. So, Patrick, like you often said that the high performance is a result of the low tolerances. Uh, I would say that's a powerful statement. But if you can unpack like what you mean by that and how it shapes your philosophy on the leadership.
When you talk about high performance as a result of low tolerances, I find that one of the best explanations of that would be, the comparison of cars. So we go out and we buy, let's say, a Ford Prius, and we could be a professional driver, but it doesn't matter how hard we push that Ford Prius. If we push it beyond its capacity, it does not have the tolerances within its braking systems, its tires,
Hmm.
its suspension to actually accommodate that kind of driving. In other words, you can literally drive the wheels off that car because the tolerance aren't designed for real high performance. So when we look at that same scenario, so we look at a Prius and we go, okay, well, you can only do so much with it and you'll blow the wheels off it because it's not designed to go that fast, corner that fast,
Mm.
handle that quickly. Compare that to, I don't know, throw any kind of a Porsche, let's talk about a Porsche 911, meant designed to do a couple hundred miles an hour or a couple hundred kilometers an hour, however you want to put it. But the design of the car, the brakes, the tires, the profile, the aerodynamics of that car, the engine is designed for high performance. So very low tolerances. Now we go, okay, we can drive that car really fast, lots of cornering. We can do a lot of things with that car, and it's got low tolerances. And then there's a next level, which is a
Mm.
supercar, even lower tolerances. The interior design, every nut, screw, bolt, handcrafted. Those are even lower tolerances. So we can push that car even further because tolerances are there. So high performance in that example
Mm.
is a result of low tolerances. You have to have low tolerances to really have high performance. So that's kind of the context for it. Now, when we start to look at ourselves as leaders and we start to look at the environment we're creating for our team, and we say
Mm.
high performance is a low tolerance. So, first off, in our world of self mastery, what some
Mm.
refer to, of course, as personal development, I go to the next level. Personal development's cool and it's a thing. But when we talk about leadership, we're talking about self mastery. And what are the tolerances you even have for yourself? The discipline,
Mm.
that you hold, the commitment you have to your health and wellness, your emotional, mental, spiritual health and wellness.
Mm.
These are all based on tolerances. And leadership means that we master. To be great leaders, we have to have self mastery. Our teams, our businesses are a reflection of us. So the higher or the more aware we are of our own tolerance levels, the better we are in terms of our own performance. So when we talk about it in an environment
Mm.
and a culture of high performance and low tolerances, the most effective way to create culture is to have your team design the culture with you. So what do I mean by that? If I'm working with my team or teams, which I've done many, many times, this is just a great system for getting the conversation going, is you collectively have a half day, even a full day meeting, and you bring your teams together, whether it be your management team or the whole team, depending if you're a small business or where you are in the scope of your business. But ultimately, you bring a group of people together and you collectively talk about what is the environment we want to create and work in? What is the culture we want to have?
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? Let's talk about culture. There are cultures where within the working environment, there's lots of gossip, people aren't supportive of each other, they're talking about each other behind their backs, somebody doesn't feel like showing up for work, they phone in sick. Of course, that puts everybody that still comes to work in the office or wherever you're at, that puts them behind the eight ball because they don't have that person. But that person really wasn't sick. They just wanted a day off. Maybe they slept in, they had too much of a party the night before. So when you start to bring a team together and define what is the culture they want, here's the thing. We say, okay, in our culture, we don't want gossip. It's got to be
Mm.
That's got to be off the table. No gossiping allowed. No complaining, no blaming. In other words, something happens, you don't blame, you don't complain. You look at it and go, what did we do to create the scenario? How do we fix it? So, in other words, it's not about just complaining, it is about
Mm.
how do we fix the issue? So that becomes a part of the system where anybody who gossips, culture, no, everybody shows up for work on time or they give everybody a heads up and saying, I'm going to be running a little bit late. They give advance notice. So they put the rules of engagement of what the culture is. So the culture,
Mm.
people clean up their lunch mess. That's culture. How many fights get started in a lunchroom because somebody left their dirty dishes in the sink or didn't clean up their science project in the fridge? They seem so petty, but those are energy leaks that can all be prevented by having a cultural agreement. Now, what's really cool about this exercise, and anybody who's listening that wants to consider doing it with their own team, you get a whiteboard. I like a flip chart personally, and we write down all of the things that we say we want within our culture. Okay, no blame, no complain, show up on time, supportive, helping others, heads up. I see somebody, somebody needs a hand. It's not like, oh, that's not my department. No, we all pitch in. This is in the betterment of our clients, our business, and what we want and how we want to occur as a team. That is leading towards high performance. You make that list and then you go through it again and you come up with 10, 12, 8, 20, doesn't matter, ways that you want and that you stand for as a culture. And you write all those things out. And then you look at the team and you say, okay, does everybody get this? Does everybody agree to this? Yes, this is great. This is how we're going to operate. Everybody comes up and initials that sheet that you've done, that flip chart sheet.
Yep.
Okay, you now have an agreement.
Mm.
You then take that flip chart piece of paper and you hang it somewhere, whether it be the lunchroom, the staff room, the shop, the office, whatever it might be. But what's powerful about that is now when somebody is in the office and they're complaining or they're gossiping,
Mm.
it becomes self-policing because the others in the team have the right, because that's part of the agreement, that's part of the culture,
Yep.
is we say, hold it. We agreed, no blame, no complain. If we've got an issue, let's solve the issue. Let's not just stand around and complain about it and blame others for it.
Mm.
Let's deal with it. And if we can't deal with it, we take it to management. That's all part of the agreement. It becomes self-policing. And the real powerful part of that is your human resources. So now your managers, your general managers, your HR people, they're actually hiring and they're laying, this is the culture. Anything here that doesn't align with you, and you will have, and you will hear within the interview where they don't align with that. And so that becomes a box that we have to play in that defines the culture called high performance. This is what we define as high performance as a team. So it's kind of a long-winded explanation, but when we create that culture, it's not about the leader saying, this is how you have to be. No, this is, we collectively agree to that. And if you can't agree with it, you do one of two things. There's a phrase that I like to use. I align and I agree, or I align, but I don't agree. Okay. I don't agree with this policy, but I will align with it. You follow what I'm saying? Because not everybody's going to align with things, but you make an agreement. I don't align, but I'll agree.
Mm.
So the point of all of this is that it is intentional. It isn't a boss, the four-lettered word boss coming in, forcing you to do something. It's no, this is what we agreed to. And if you can't align and you can't agree, then you have to go. So that's the way to create and go into the steps of creating a high performance team. And it's very, very effective.
Exactly. Exactly true. So, um, I mean, if you have to say that, how can leaders recognize the hidden tolerances in their organizations that quietly undermine the performance? What is it?
Well, it always boils down to communication, doesn't it? So if you're talking about the leader, where is the leader sitting down and having open conversations where they listen? There's a famous Stephen Covey quote, which is seek first to understand and then to be understood. When we talk about self mastery and we talk about leadership, it's their job as a leader to listen. And sometimes you have to listen and read between the lines. Sometimes you have to ask the right questions to prompt a conversation. But our job as leaders to kind of unpack those low tolerance or those areas of high tolerance where we put up with stuff. It's our job to unpack that. I'm going to give you an example. Very common scenario. Got a team, a sales team, and the sales team's pretty good, but there's one guy who's outstanding, one person who's outstanding, guy, girl, I don't care.
Okay.
But they're toxic.
Mm.
They complain, they come in late, they throw their weight around, they don't have any respect for anybody else, but they're top salespeople. But they're one-man shows. They don't work well with a team. They don't interact with others well. They don't respect others. And so a lot of leaders look at that and go, he's really hard to work with, or she's really hard to work with, but they're such great sales guy. I'm not going to give them up.
Mm.
And sadly, what those leaders don't understand, what they're missing is because of the toxicity, the way that person performs, it affects everybody else. So as much as they may be an all-star salesperson, the rest of the team is energetically shut down because of the toxicity in the office. So they're not doing their best work. Take that
Mm.
same person. Maybe they only sell 80% of what they sold before, but they get along, they support others, they communicate well, they're in it for everybody. They want everybody to be on the team and to win. Well, the next thing you know, everybody else picks up that 20%. They not only pick it up, they blow it out of the water. So this is the fundamental of when we see leaders who are not unpacking what's underneath, what's below the surface. And if you haven't created a culture and an environment for people
Mm.
to communicate in an open way and to shine a light on some of these things, then you're not in a high performance environment. And this is where many leaders get frustrated. They like to blame the team. I'm a great leader. My team sucks. Okay, well, that means that you're not a great leader. So you have to do something about that. Does that communicate? Does that land for you in terms of my explanation?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Definitely. This is really, I'd say, kind of eye opener, because it shows that the leadership mastery is not about, um, what to say, like the grand gestures, but the small standards that we all allow or ignore every single day.
Yes. 100%. So that takes, so we have the team, but we have leadership mastery is part of the self mastery game. So the clearer you are, favorite, one of my favorite terms, one of my mantras is clarity equals velocity. And the clearer we are as individuals is the clearer we are as leaders. When we talk about self mastery, we accept responsibility and accountability for our results. And this is, it's easy to point out the obvious. So, for example, government, we'll use government because it's an easy target.
Yep.
They make decisions that are brutal, bad decisions all of the time in terms of how they run a country, how they run a city. They just make bad decisions. They're a bunch of bureaucrats, many and often, although they're well intentioned, they don't have experience. They make bad decisions, but there's no accountability for that. They may or may not get reelected, but ultimately, they don't pay a price for their bad fiscal decisions. So when we live in that world, we see the results. I mean, we can all look at our own cities, our own countries, and look at the results and go, okay, but nobody's accountable. We're at the effect of it as voters or not voters, whatever your page you're on. And it's like that in leadership in businesses, is that if you have a leader that isn't willing to look in the mirror and go, my results suck, it's about me, not the team. If you are not capable or competent, if you're not willing to have courageous conversations with your team, or if you haven't created an environment and a culture where your team can have courageous conversations with you, you have a fundamental problem. That is not leadership. That is not self mastery. And that is not leadership mastery. That's a deflection. You're then being a victim and you're being irresponsible. You're not accepting accountability. You're blaming everybody else. So this becomes the issue with great leadership is you have to understand, you have to be able to look in the mirror and go, what's going on in this business, in my role, in my business, whatever it is a reflection of who I'm being or who I'm not being. And that is a hard pill for many leaders to swallow. But the most successful leaders take 100% responsibility for what's happening
Mm.
in their businesses, in their life.
Yep. So, like, I mean, do you think that the culture is something leaders build intentionally, or is it something that naturally emerges and must be steered carefully?
I don't believe there's a such thing as a culture that, works out well that left to its own device. I mean, occasionally it can happen. But if you really want what we would call a high performance team,
Mm.
then it has to be intentional. There has to be agreements in place. We can't make assumptions and we can't have unstated expectations. So if I don't say to you, if I hire you and I say to you, here's the expectation and here's the agreement that we have regarding this job, your job starts at 9 o'clock. You may have to get here at 8:50 in order to grab your coffee, get organized so that at 9 o'clock you can start work.
Yep.
Many leaders Well, the work starts at 9, your job starts at 9. Somebody walks in the door at 8:59, then they go get their coffee, they go to the bathroom, they have a conversation with their neighbor. They don't really start work till 9:15. Okay. Are you okay with that? Is that a high performance team? What did you accomplish? So in other words, the standards of performance are intentional. They have to be stated out loud so that you're managing the expectation so that if somebody shows up and says, "Well, my job starts at 9, I'm here at 9." Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you're going to eat 15 minutes by the time you grab a coffee, put your lunch away, chat with your neighbor, go to the bathroom, whatever. So are you really starting at 9 or are you really starting at 9:15? If you're okay with 9:15, then that's what it is. But if you're not, if you want a high performance team and 9 o'clock means that's high performance, that's when we start work. A high performance individual gets to work at 8:45 to get their desk set up, to get their coffee, to go to the bathroom, to get focused, to make some notes. So boom, they're ready to go at 9 o'clock. You follow?
Yep.
That's a stated expectation. What happens though is that the expectations aren't stated. Somebody comes in at 9 o'clock, gets there, and they go, "Oh, I didn't know that,
Mm.
you had to be ready to go at 9." That's because it wasn't stated. So we make assumptions. Many leaders, quote unquote, make assumptions that, well, you start at 9. That means you may have to show up at 8:45 or 8:50 to get to work. But if that isn't stated, it's an assumption. And of course, there's the old phrase of what assumptions really, when you break down assumptions, you make an ass out of you and me. So we state expectations. We have agreement of expectations. We define what high performance means for our team, for our business, for our clients, not necessarily in that order. And then that way it is intentional. And again, by design, you have the whole team agree to it and put in the nuances that they want to see that will support them in being high performance. Nothing is worse than an energy leak in a team.
Mm.
The person that shows up late, can't be counted on, talks too loud, over talks, doesn't listen. Those are breakdowns in a team. And when a team can have courageous conversations, and I mean courageous conversations to be able to state stuff out loud, because what happens in these scenarios is people take things personally. And if you're a high performance team, none of it is meant as a personal attack. It's anything but that. And that also takes some education, some training. How do you have a courageous conversation without making it a personal attack?
Yeah.
Right. So that, personal attacks, they always diminish and they kind of go down to name calling, like, this minute somebody's calling somebody else a name, you've digressed. That isn't constructive. And that isn't how you have a high performance team
Mm.
step up.
Exactly. Amazing. And this might sound contradictory, but actually not. Like some people hear that the high performance and think it sounds rigid, like it leaves no room for the mistakes, experimentation, or even the compassion as well. So, how do you balance that high standards with the humanity?
Well, you do. I mean, because even in that languaging, that question,
Yeah.
mistakes happen and mistakes, what's a mistake? What is a mistake? If I'm trying something new and it doesn't work, is that a mistake or is that part of the learning curve? What is a mistake? And so we try something, we don't get the result we want. Is that a mistake? No, we didn't get the result we wanted. So we either have to change what we're doing, refine the process, or kick the whole idea to the curb. People spend so much time on it's a mistake. A very wealthy friend of mine, like, I mean, 500-600 million dollars a year in his business at least. And I asked him once, I said, we were on his boat in the Caribbean, and I said, Brian, like, how is it that you managed to achieve this kind of success? And he looked at me and he goes,
Mm,
I don't make mistakes. I went,
mm,
what? Like, and I didn't respond right away because I was like, that sounds really arrogant. Like, I don't make mistakes. Like, I'm thinking this. And it was a pregnant pause. And then he went, I just get a result. And it's either the result I wanted or it's the result I didn't want. And if it's a result I didn't want, I put in the correction and I go again. Or I look at it and go, this is never going to work. And I kick the whole idea to the curb. I don't make mistakes. I just get a result. That's the key part of that. I just get a result. So the humanity in it is that if my team isn't making mistakes, if everything my team is doing is working, that's great news. But are they pushing the envelope? Are they pushing the edges of what's possible? Because when you push the edge of what's possible, you're going to have little failures along the way. Whether it's a marketing initiative, a sales initiative, an idea of a product. Okay, if it works out, awesome, we celebrate. But just because it doesn't work out doesn't mean it was a mistake. Sometimes we have to try things and we don't know until we get the result. So I think there's a misunderstanding of high performance isn't perfection. High performance is the desire to hit, we'll call it perfection, to go and take it to the next level. So when you go back to the analogy of a Prius versus a supercar or versus a Porsche, those low entry cars, those economical cars are not meant to be high performance. In other words, we buy a car at that price knowing that it's not meant to be driven like a Porsche. It can't take it, and you'll probably crash and hurt yourself. When we start to understand that, oh, we want to take the Prius and have it perform more and better, oh, we need to put better tires on it. We need to improve the suspension. We need to put different tires on it. We need to change some aspects of it so that it performs more or better,
mm,
faster. Okay? That takes experimentation, then takes trying things. But ultimately, those aren't mistakes. And I think that's we make a mistake if we do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That's a mistake.
amazing. And also, like, is there a danger that the um, leaders in their drive for the performance can unintentionally create burnout cultures instead of high performance ones?
Well, high performance is, even when you define your culture,
Mhm.
high performance is always about checks and balances. So, in other words, high performance is okay, these are the standards of performance,
Mm,
but it has to be monitored. We are human by nature, and by nature, we go through all sorts of mental gymnastics, emotional gymnastics. Things happen at home that affect our mindset and the way we show up. We can have all sorts of dramas and traumas in our life
mm,
that on a team, and we have to have compassion. So when we talk about the phrase you use, where do we have room for humanity? Well, we also have to have compassion and empathy for those that are on our team. So that there are times, think about a sports team where somebody on the team can't play 100%. Maybe they're playing slightly injured. That means
yeah,
somebody else has to step up and pick up the slack. Doesn't mean that
exactly.
person is, we don't put them down like a bad dog, you know? We don't kick them off
Yeah.
the team. We step up, we fill the gap that they can't fill. And so that part of high performance teams means you have
Mm,
compassion, you have empathy, you have understanding for those around the team.
exactly. Wow. Amazing. Lovely, lovely. And also, uh, in your own journey after 40 years of entrepreneurship, what's the one belief about success that you have completely unlearned?
For me, I think
Mm,
we sadly we judge often success in business by the amount of money that a business makes, an owner has, the net worth of somebody. And as much as that's kind of a benchmark, it is a scorecard, it is an indicator. But I know many very successful businesses that they base their success on what it is on the lifestyle and the operating system that the business has. So as much as yes, we are businesses and we have to have revenue and we have to have profitability and we have to be able to manage costs,
yep.
you can have $1 million business that's just as successful or even more successful than a $1 billion business, unless the only measurement you have for success is money.
Mhm.
So for me, now at this point in my life, I'm looking at myself and I go, I live an amazing life.
Mm,
I'm not worth $100 million, but my life and my business,
yeah.
one of my businesses has been around 41 years. Is that success? I have staff that have been with me 15, 20, 30 years in that business. To me, that's success. If I weigh that against a $1 billion company or $100 million company, and I'm only looking at the dollars and cents, if I go, yeah, no, I, I'm not successful at all. But I look at the life that my wife and I have created, the teams that we have, the various businesses we have, and I can measure that as successful. So what I've unlearned is how I measure success and what it means to me.
Exactly. Wow.
And by the way, money is important. Don't mistake that. Money's high on the list, but it isn't for me at the top of the list.
True. That's true. Great. So, Patrick, this has been such a masterclass, I would say, in leadership clarity and the culture. And I'd say that you have reminded us that the leadership mastery is not about the authority, but it's all about the alignment. So, for everyone who is listening, like, I hope you are walking away with a simple but profound realization that your tolerances shape your culture and your culture shapes your results. So, Patrick, if someone wants to connect with you, what would be the great medium to connect?
The best thing to do is go to my podcast, The Everyday Millionaire. So you can go to uh, theeverydaymillionaire.ca or TEDM, TEDM, the Everyday Millionaire.ca, TEDM.ca. And you can subscribe to newsletters. I'm not selling anything, but once you get into our ecosystem, I share a lot of day to day
Mm,
tips. We talk about the Mind Shui way, Mind Shui being feng shui for the mind, clearing the clutter of your mind so that you can have flow and you can have energy and be the best version of yourself. And to go on the journey of self mastery, and we do that through newsletters and communication. So that is the best way to follow me. And of course, I'm on Instagram under P Francey or tedm.podcast. So I'm easily Googleable and you can find me.
mhm. Amazing. That's really amazing. So, dear listeners, I'll put all the links into the show notes for your easy reference so that you can easily reach out to Patrick. And to all the listeners, like, remember that success is not reserved for a chosen few. I mean, as Patrick says, that it's simple, significantly impact many people's lives every day. So, with this hope, until next time, this is your host Avik reminding you that leadership is not about managing the others, but it's all about mastering yourself and designing cultures that bring out the very best in people. So, stay aligned, stay purposeful, and keep leading with clarity. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.